Happy Friday night. This is a perfect night for us to be in conversation with my dear friend, Stephen Donziger. Let's give you a little context. First of all, Stephen, welcome. Thank you for being with me.
Thanks for having me.
Everybody, I just put something on Twitter that seems so perfect for the conversation tonight. It's from author Stephen King. He said, "Don't expect the oil companies to bear part of the gas price burden. They won't. They could, but they won't. They are amoral." Boy, that says it all, huh, Stephen?
That's for sure.
He has a way with words. He might think of doing it for a living. Your office sent me an article, actually, that someone else on my team had sent me, an article that's been going around today by Bill McKibben. This is how we defeat Putin and other petrostate autocrats. And of course, what everybody's talking about is the fact that this is a perfect time. The president could declare a climate emergency. If ever there was a time to just make that warp speed transition from dirty economy to clean economy, this would be it. You want to give us a little thumbnail sketch of what's going on, why the gas prices are so high, what our dependence on oil and gas is doing right now, the fact that we used to buy it for Russia, we're not buying it now, the fact that MBS won't even call Biden back, the fact that he, now all of a sudden Maduro is looking better to those guys. What's the situation as you see it?
Well, the opportunity that you identified to use this as a chance really to do a radical shift to clean energy should be happening. But unfortunately, once again, we're seeing just the opposite happen, where you see the big oil companies consolidate, take advantage of this war to consolidate their power, to cement their position for years to come. I mean, there's really 3 or 4 things that are happening of note. One is, once the invasion of Ukraine happened, gas prices shot through the roof. So the consumers are being gouged by the oil companies. Other big oil companies, Chevron among them, by the way, Chevron is the only major US company that is yet to divest from Russia in response to this war. Okay. They're still in Russia, in a joint project with Putin's government, generating hundreds of millions of dollars a day that Putin is using to fund his war machine that is killing innocent men, women, and children in Ukraine. So Chevron is making money in a joint project with a person who is committing war crimes. At the same time, it is coming back into the United States Congress and arguing for an expansion of drilling here in response to the supposed shortage of oil created by the war. So, they are making money coming and going. And we see this not only with Chevron, we see it with Exxon, we see it with BP and Shell and all the major oil companies who are going to their governments and saying we need to drill more and drill immediately. But of course, any new drilling, Marianne, is really about the future. It's about years down the road. These are projects that won't get online for a long time, but once they happen, they're locked in for years. And really, ultimately, what Putin has done in the Ukraine is not only disastrous for the people of that country and for many others in other surrounding countries, it is really disastrous for the climate. I mean, we were at a tipping point before the war. I mean, this is bad for the climate issue. I mean, really bad. And we're going to be cemented into the same old model, the planet destroying model that I've personally seen Chevron employ around the world and in Ecuador, where I've worked as a lawyer for many years. And I think the end of the game is going to be, really bad for humanity, for the earth, for the ecosystem.
You've spent over 983 days, I think, under either house arrest, and part of that time, of course, actually in a federal prison. Mm-hmm. When this is all over, this nightmare is over. Of course, this is just one part of the nightmare, we realize. But when you're no longer under house arrest, the end of April, right? The last week in April? 25th. Where is your passion going? Are you feeling that this larger argument about the climate crisis is where your energy is going to go? I mean, you personally have seen what Chevron did in Ecuador and what they did to you because you tried to stop it or hold them accountable. Are you feeling like your mission, as it were, is to address the larger issue of the malfeasance of the oil companies?
absolutely part of it. I mean, when I started in the 1990s working, to hold oil companies, in this case Chevron, accountable for massive pollution, and this is all down in the Amazon of Ecuador, where they admitted to dumping 16 billion gallons of oil waste onto indigenous ancestral lands, and there's been thousands of people who've gotten cancer, as a result. But I realized over time, as we did battle with this very powerful company, that the case was about more than pollution. It was about more than getting a remedy for the indigenous peoples. It really was about a frontline battle to stop an industry from continuing to engage in practices that not only were killing vulnerable communities, but were really writ large destroying the planet. So, I have sort of tried to learn more about the larger issues and stepped up, but I definitely see post April 25, part of my role will be to continue. And I've been doing this really the whole time I've been on house arrest, as much as I can on social media and in interviews, to really speak out about these issues. I really feel like those of us in our team who've been battling Chevron all these years and seen the malfeasance, the corruption, kind of the rotten business model so close. I think we have a special responsibility to speak out, and I've definitely planned to do that.
I'm sure that you've been following the situation pretty closely. MBS, the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia, wouldn't even return Biden's phone calls.
Well,
go on.
I was going to say, equally interesting is he's gotten very tight with Putin.
Absolutely. The Arab states, most of the Arab states are supporting Putin. It's very scary.
And it's, what's interesting is fossil fuels are funding Putin to engage in war. I mean,
right.
Think about it. What Biden wants is MBS to produce more oil so the price of oil goes down. But, MBS is clever and Putin is very clever. And basically they know that Putin knew just by waging war, the price of oil would skyrocket. And if he could sort of manage it effectively, although I'm not so sure he is because of the sanctions and the sort, but the fact is the rise in prices is basically funding his war. The rise in prices that was created by his actions in invading the Ukraine is funding his actions in invading the Ukraine. I mean, it's really crazy if you think about it. So,
this war is being paid for by. Mm-hmm.
This is all crazy stuff. I mean, it's like it's destroying the planet. It's empowering an autocrat to commit war crimes. And it's also killing people because it's so dirty and people breathe it. And millions of people die every year from air pollution caused by fossil fuel combustion. So, we have to make this shift, and we have to understand that higher gas prices are not a reason to drill more. They're a reason to drill less and really end our on dirty fossil fuels, which are really killing our future.
Well, everybody, I hope you really take that in, that Russia does not have a large or thriving economy. Their main export is oil and gas. And that, of course, is what pays them to be able to afford the army that they have, the very powerful army that they have, with which they are killing innocent men, women, and children in Ukraine. Now, going back to the tweet from Stephen King, if the oil companies wanted to make a patriotic move, if they wanted to put something before short-term profits for their stockholders, which is God within that version of capitalism, they could actually, given the fact that they make so many billions of dollars of profit a year, they could refuse to gouge right now. They could simply, just like we saw during COVID, there were ways that these huge companies could have made it easier on people, given that there was an emergency. This country has no ability to respond to an emergency anymore, because this country will not put anything before the short-term profit needs of corporate America. It's unbelievable. One of my favorite stories, Stephen, when I was living in Detroit, they like to tell the story about how at the beginning of World War II, because we didn't have a standing army, Roosevelt called in the leaders of the big three car makers at that time. He said, gentlemen, we don't have an army. We've been attacked. I need this many bombers, and I need this many planes, and I need this many ships. And they said, oh, President Roosevelt, we're patriotic Americans. And as soon as we are finished getting our car quotas for this year, as soon as we're finished selling our car quotas, sir, you can count on us. We're going to build your ships, and we're going to build your planes, and we're going to build your tanks. And he said, gentlemen, I don't think you understood what I said. You will not be building any cars until I get my ships and I get my planes and I get my tanks. And that is what the National Production Act would do. That's what it would have done during COVID, and that's what it could do right now. I think in McKibben's article, maybe one of these others, Fiona Harvey's or someone, I think it was McKibben's, and he talked about the fact that we could ramp up for an emergency. America doesn't respond to an emergency anymore because the federal government refuses to do anything that keeps these corporations from being able to make their short-term profit. Well, and even to the point where more people die. It's really, it's rather unbelievable and a real crisis in our government and in our country.
I think what you're describing is just what's the fundamental weakening of the government over the last 30, 40 years, starting with the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980, but it's really accelerated in the last 10, 15 years with the Koch brothers funding network and the election of Donald Trump. I mean, we have an incredibly weak federal government compared to other civilized countries. And, what is the role of government, if you really think about it? I mean, one key role, and Ralph Nader told me this when I was a young lawyer, he said, the government is the institution that is created to protect the interests of the population against corporate power. Because as Stephen King pointed out, these oil companies are amoral. Is it even fair of us to expect them to not raise prices?
Yeah, scorpions sting.
Possibly can. I mean, no, that's where the government comes in. That's where regulators come in. That's where laws need to be passed. But the problem in our country is that the corporatocracy has essentially bought all three branches of government. I mean, even Joe Biden, who often makes the right noises and states decent policies, can't seem to get anything done because he's always getting undermined by the lobbyists and by the Congress, the inability of the Congress to do much. And the Congress, of course, is completely dependent on fossil fuel contributions. I mean, even the Democratic side. And we know from my personal experience, even pockets of our judiciary are now controlled.
Well, you certainly,
so we have a problem. And I think until we recognize that our government isn't functioning as a government should in an advanced industrialized society, the power is going to continue to rest in these large corporations. And there's no more powerful industry in this country than the fossil fuel industry.
Well, these corporations have become more powerful than the government. The only place where I would diverge from what you just said, it's true that the president can't control cinema and mansion. So there's some things where absolutely he couldn't get it done through the Congress. But the president still has the power of the pen. He still has the power of executive orders. He could declare a medical emergency and expand Medicare to everyone. And right now, he could declare a climate emergency. So let's, this idea, Democrats always do that. Well, they did that with Obama. Oh, poor Obama, they won't let him about things we hadn't even tried. And like you said, this started with, I'm sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, excuse me, you're totally right. I totally agree with you. I mean, the fact is Biden and Obama and all of these individuals do have the power, if they would only have the courage.
That's right.
To take actions without the Congress. You're totally right.
It's a co-equal branch of government. I mean, it's supposed to, I'm tired of hearing what the Congress won't do. What about what the president won't do is really the question we need to ask ourselves. That's one thing about the Republicans. Sometimes the Democrats, I remember you heard it with Clinton, you heard it with Obama. Well, we don't have a mandate. The election is the mandate.
Right.
The Republicans, look, we won the election. That's our mandate. They'll take their power and abuse it. They'll overdo. But the Democrats so often will only go so far. It's not enough that the American people put you there. It's like, yeah, but how will the oil companies feel? Or how will they take it? Or how will the health insurance companies take it? You saw this when Obama was president. He had talked about universal health care. Then when they even talked about the public option, it was so clear that the insurance companies told him you can go this far and you can't go any further. And now, when you look at COVID and when you look at what's happening now with the gas prices, when you look at the climate crisis, it is clear that, going back to what Stephen King said, it's interesting. that he didn't say they were immoral. He said they were amoral.
Yeah.
And that was the right word to use. People in the oil companies don't wake up in the morning, how can we screw the planet? That's not what they're thinking. They simply think it's not their job to have to care one way or the other. That's government's job, right? That's the point.
And I know
amoral, amoral actions have immoral consequences.
Oh,
yes,
yeah.
go on.
I was going to say, I mean, there's a lot of people in the oil industry that want government regulation. They want the government to tell them what to do to function in a world that's changing, because they're not going to do it on their own for the very reasons you point out.
And they say, I'd get fired if I did that, because I would get fired by my board. So you need, exactly. They have said this to my face. I'm sure they've said this to you as well.
But, I got to just point out, this is a pet peeve of mine, so people who know me know that, our legal team won this $9.5 billion judgment against Chevron, and Chevron left 1,000 open air toxic waste pits in Ecuador. There's pipes running the oil waste into rivers and streams that people rely on for their drinking water. Okay. They've refused to pay a penny, refused to comply with court orders that they clean this terrible disaster up. It's called the Amazon Chernobyl. So they're refusing to clean up Ecuador. They have all sorts of environmental problems in other countries. Yet they're operating as the last and only U.S. company in Russia today in a joint project with the Russian government that generates $500 million a day for Putin, much of which he's using to fund his war machine in Ukraine. So they're making money coming and going while really, really hurting vulnerable communities all over the place, be they in the Amazon of Ecuador or in these towns in Ukraine that are just being pummeled by these missiles and attacks on civilians that are just horrid to watch. But whether it's missiles or it's dumping of oil, they both are violent acts that destroy people. And, it's really hard to watch, and it really upsets me that our court systems are not strong enough to force the Chevrons of the world to actually comply with the law, be it in Ecuador or be it in Russia.
Quite the opposite. I mean, even our Supreme Court, and specifically our Supreme Court, just moves more and more in a corporatist direction. You can't look to the Supreme Court to push back against overreach by corporate forces. Quite the opposite. People might remember that when Trump was president, his first Secretary of State, a man named Rex Tillerson, Trump had not been in office. People didn't know if he even knew, where you're going to get your people. And who had ever heard of Rex Tillerson? Well, Rex Tillerson had been CEO of Exxon, and he had gotten some big award in Russia and their relationship with the oil companies. You kind of get the feeling, and you're right when you get this feeling, that in many ways, these oil companies just sort of play these governments around the world like pawns.
Yeah, they don't.
Yeah, that's why it's called multinational corporations.
They actually prefer to work in countries where the governments are corrupt and there's authoritarians, because it makes it easier for them to do business. And
they would. Yeah, I thought you. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because whatever they say goes.
Yeah, they don't like governments that are really democratic, because then they're held accountable for their pollution and they can't pay people off. So, they are amoral. And there's also massive greenwashing. By the way, I don't know if you noticed, but on TV, like within, 24 hours of the invasion of Ukraine, there's significant Chevron TV advertising describing it as a human energy company. I mean, it's all over the place. So they're taking advantage of an environment where people feel on edge and unsettled, and gas prices are rising and no one knows what's going to happen. And Putin's threatening to use nuclear weapons. And they're running these feel-good ads about what a great company they are, like they're our big salvation, when they are actually the cause of the problem. And you see this massive greenwashing, by the American Petroleum Institute. Whenever there's a crisis like this in a war, they are all in there to make people believe that the solution to any sort of insecurity we feel is more drilling and more oil and more gas and more of these fossil fuels that are really polluting and destroying our planet. I mean, it's just extraordinary to see these ads during the war. They're all over TV.
Now, I'm sure that some people are saying, but could we do it fast enough? Is there enough solar powers? Are there enough wind farms? You know, one of the things, again, in this Bill McKibben article, and everyone, I recommend that you read it, it's How We Defeat Putin and Other Petrostate Autocrats by the great Bill McKibben. And he talks about how, going back to my conversation before about how we don't know how to respond in an emergency anymore. He points to situations during World War II, much like the one that I talked about. We didn't, the rubber, he uses an example in that article about how the Axis forces had more control, control of rubber than we did, the Allies did. But we came up with substitutes and we did it quickly because it had to be done. So a lot of people are talking about, yeah, but Russia has the nickel and we need the nickel for the solar, et cetera. Can you talk to us much? Are you very informed about what the specific things are that we could do and do quickly in order to ramp up with clean energy if we had the consensus among the American people and we miraculously had a president who said, okay, we got to do this, we got to respond, it's an emergency? What could we do and what could we do quickly?
Well, first of all, there's so many things that can be done immediately. I mean, one is tax incentives to switch to solar.
I was hearing my friend Peter Hager was talking, he's all activated about this law that they just passed in Florida, where have taken away any tax incentives for going solar.
Yeah, and that's the result of lobbying by utility companies. I mean, it's just extraordinary. So any little incremental change, like say a tax incentive to encourage homeowners to put solar panels on the roof, is being actively lobbied against by the industry. And, look, the only way this is going to shift in the time available to us to save ourselves is through massive government intervention. But think about it. The Koch brothers in the industry have just spent the last 20 to 30 years dumping billions of dollars into propaganda to convince people.
Longer than that, because they started back in the 70s. Of course, and then they got Reagan, but they really started with the Economist Buchanan back in the 70s.
And the whole idea is to prime people to think government can't solve a damn problem. And that's why they were so nervous during the COVID crisis. I mean, this COVID crisis still exists, but I mean, when COVID first hit, there was all these people that were trying to undermine the ability of government to create test kits and to do all the things that governments would do to respond to a health emergency, because they didn't want the American people to understand that government can actually solve a major problem.
At that time, there were people who died early in the crisis when things were first hitting in the United States. There were people who died because we didn't have enough personal protection equipment. We didn't have enough ventilators. We didn't have enough masks. And even when the WHO had offered some, there were members of the Trump administration who convinced the president, no, it should be American companies who get to manufacture this, because if American companies manufacture, then they'll get to make money. So people died just so that more American companies could make a profit. And there were actually people, I remember there were Republican politicians who were on television. They tried this for a while, and then they seemed to stop it when it wasn't playing well, who actually suggested, well, some people would rather die than see American capitalism be hurt by this. Remember that?
Down in Texas, I remember that guy.
But I think people went, no, actually, I wouldn't. And so they stopped that one. That's not playing well.
I was the lieutenant governor of Texas. But let me just say this, okay? People need to understand that we need a strong federal government to protect the population from the abuses we're describing. Okay, it's that simple. And all of these years and years and years, decades now, propaganda undermining people's belief in the efficacy of government, the federal government in particular, has really hampered our ability to solve these major problems that confront us.
So let's simplify this. So the first principle, one of the first principles of the United States, is that it is the role of government to balance individual liberty and concern for the common good. There's a balance there. Yes, you can do whatever you want, but not, including economically, unless it hurts someone else. That's called concern for the common good. And they had in Ronald Reagan, the Koch brothers and their entire machinery, had in Ronald Reagan the perfect actor to sell the line. Right. Government's not the answer. Government is the problem. That propaganda, even today, anytime you even suggest the government do its job, you're called a socialist or communist. I mean, you even use the word about our collective good. Ooh, collectivism, communism. I mean, the ignorance also. the pure ignorance about what those words even mean.
But you're right. There's no coincidence that an actor was elected president in a time when this whole shift really started to occur in a deep way. Because it takes an actor, someone really charming, to sell what is essentially a bill of goods to the American people, that the government's the problem. And it's
but it's not like the quote unquote politicians who were very qualified have a very good track record either. Right now, it's a former comedian who's looking better than anyone else.
Well, because he's a real person. And, I call, our political system. Look, I have a lot of respect for politicians who try to do good. Many have stood by me.
And many of them do.
Jim McGovern, Jamie Raskin, AOC, Rashida Tlaib. There's so many good people.
Yeah.
But they are stuck in a system that is built to reward the hacks. That's what I call them. It's kind of like the hack system. No disrespect to anyone, but the reality is when everything's so transactional and everything is based on who you can get campaign contributions from so you can get reelected. And I'm even had two of my law school classmates who were prominent Democrats in the Congress. And I reach out to them to help me and they never responded. I mean, I know these people. And then I looked at who was some of their campaign donors and Chevron had given them each money, probably because they knew we had gone to law school together,
So they wanted to cut them off at the pass.
Exactly. I mean, they're so
I'm sure that they did that investigation. They said, find out anybody in Congress who he knows. Oh my God, you're absolutely right.
That's how deep it goes.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is, I mean, come on, for $1,000 campaign contribution, you're not going to go up against Chevron. I mean, it's a joke how cheap it is to buy influence. It's inexpensive compared to the benefits these companies get. So, we need to wake up here and understand that this shift to clean energy, as Bill McKibben points out in that excellent article, by the way, it's in The Guardian, which is the British newspaper. You don't see that kind of stuff much in the American press these days, by the way. But I mean, the American corporate-owned press.
Yeah, independent media is doing a good job.
Media is doing a great job. But, we need to really understand that we, again, at an even more pivotal moment because of the war and because of how the fossil fuel industry is consolidating massive power to cement its position for the next 20 years based on the old model that is killing the planet. I mean, this is a serious thing. And I know we've seen these incredibly compelling images on TV out of the Ukraine. It kills me to watch this stuff, okay? But broader context is it is being exploited by this very dirty industry to continue its old ways of doing things that have gotten us to the brink of climate disaster. And we have to pay attention to this.
We have to pay attention to the fact that everything is connected to everything. I mean, it's the pillaging of our country. It's a pillaging of our democracy. It's a pillaging of our planet.
I mean, thank you for what you do, because you're a voice of reason and morality. That's
thank you,
Marianne. And I love how you think and what you say, and just having a conversation with you, because we need more people like you in politics. We need people who are willing to speak truth to power in elected politics. We don't have enough of those people.
Maybe you'll run. Maybe when you get over on the other side of this, maybe you'll run for something. One thing that I know you won't do is shut up, and we're going to be counting on you to make sure that you do. Tell us anything before we go. Tell us anything else you want to make sure that people know while we're out here. People are watching. People will be watching. Anything else you want to let us know about right now?
I want to remind people that I've been in detention not because I did something wrong, because I did something right.
Right. That's a good line. Not because I did something wrong, but because you did something right. It's so true.
Our case has been validated by multiple appellate courts. And Chevron keeps trying to go after me in retaliation, and the United Nations has already ruled my detention's illegal. I just want to tell people that when my sentence ends on April 25th, I'm already out there, but from my apartment, but I'm really going to get out there. I'm going to travel. I'm going to be speaking about these issues. I am not out of danger, though. Chevron, I suspect, is going to try to come after me again through a civil case. And we're asking people we need to keep building support. We need to keep building our movement. And if you can help or learn more about it, go to freedonziger.com. It's a website where we have a bunch of articles and materials. And also we have a legal defense fund. If people can help, if you can donate, we really appreciate it, because it costs a lot of money to enlist lawyers and campaigners to deal with this. And the other thing I want to mention is 10 prominent lawyers wrote a letter to President Biden requesting that he pardon me. We cannot have private.
When did that happen?
This happened about 2 weeks ago, just before the war kind of distracted people's attention, understandably.
Mm-hmm.
But it's out there. And this next week, dozens and dozens of non-governmental organizations, human rights groups, environmental groups are sending a letter to Biden demanding that he pardon me. And it's an extraordinary global movement to stick up for me. But what people are really, people, yes, they're sticking up for me and my family, my wife, my son. But what they're really sticking up for is the principle that lawyers, frontline lawyers and advocates cannot be imprisoned in any rule of law country, particularly the United States of America. So people are really upset by this, and we're getting people to support and sign on the petition to demand that I be pardoned. And that would put an end to this complete charade of a case that Chevron has financed and used one of their law firms to directly prosecute me after the United States attorney refused to prosecute me on these criminal contempt charges because I wouldn't turn over privileged information of my clients to Chevron. So go to freedonziger.com and get involved. And if you can, help us. There's all sorts of actions. Sign the pardon petition, and let's just keep building this.
We shouldn't forget, everyone, much as Stephen was just saying, this was not just a case against Stephen Donziger. It was really a case, it wouldn't have been worth it to Chevron if there wasn't an ulterior motive here. It was bigger in their mind than just going after Stephen. It was going after any lawyer or environmental activist who had the audacity to challenge them on that level. They were drawing a line. So they weren't just coming after Stephen, they were coming after all of us. And we want to take the opportunity, of course, to mention that there's a real similarity there between the efforts to suppress lawyers and activists and the effort to prosecute Julian Assange, coming after publishers of material that they don't want known. And of course, the issue of the classified documentation there is that governmental secrecy is part of all of this, particularly when it comes to military affairs, that when the system just doesn't want you to know something, they find it inconvenient for you to know, they are too quick to classify information. The classification system was never meant to be that. The government isn't supposed to be able to just classify information unless they have a damn good reason, unless they can prove that it would be a risk to national security. Yeah. Right now, if journalists say, well, why is this document classified? They say, we can't tell you, it's classified. So the whole thing has gone too far. And this is why we have to stand up for people like Stephen. It's why we have to stand up for people like Assange. It's why we have to stand up against the malfeasance of these big oil companies or any other huge corporate behemoths who simply once again, not only do they operate from a very amoral place, but they override the will of the people over and over and over again. The will of the people, this is the thing, Stephen, that's just so awful. The American people don't want this. It's just like with so many of these issues, the American people, poll after poll, the American people want Medicare for all. The American people want free college. American people want a higher minimum wage. The American people want serious climate change mitigation. The American people want at least a substantial reduction in the college loan debt. But as you were saying, and we were talking about, our government has become a system of legalized bribery. Yeah. And all of us just have to be so awake right now to what's going on. I also want to mention that tonight I went to a fundraiser here in Washington, D.C. for the inimitable Nina Turner, who is running once again. Have you ever met Nina personally?
I have not, but I've seen her from afar, and I'm a great admirer. I'm so happy.
When we get you out of that apartment, I look forward to introducing the two of you. You have a very similar fire. And everybody, she's got her primary in May. I heard her tonight. I heard her last night. She's not just a daughter of Cleveland. She's a daughter of America. Mm-hmm. And there some people are coming after her who should be ashamed of themselves. Some of the smears, as you can imagine, particular feeling about that.
Yeah.
Please do what you can. If you feel, I know if you're still with Stephen and me right now, we know the kinds of values that you have about these issues, which says to me, by definition, you would support the candidacy of someone like Nina Turner. Please go to ninaturner.com. Is that it, Lauren? ninaturner.com. So remember, freedonziger.com. Please do what you can, and ninaturner.com. Please do what you can. What do you think, Stephen? Anything else?
Well, I'm so glad you mentioned Nina. And I just want to say before people go, there's one very concrete thing that should happen immediately, and I'm going back to my favorite. Chevron needs to get the heck out of Russia. Okay. Mm-hmm. Chevron is funding war crimes. Chevron, you're the last company left in Russia. By the way, they negotiated an exemption with President Biden.
Why? How?
They claim, I'm telling you what they say. They claim that their oil is, coming out, is going to at least increase supply such the prices would not rise even higher. But it's just hogwash. It's BS. And
that is so outrageous. It wasn't even for a quid pro quo. If he had even said to them, okay, you can keep doing it, and we want to see a major price reduction.
Yeah, exactly. But, look, it's the same. I'm telling you, going with the vaccines and COVID, how the government funded the development of the vaccines and had not negotiated any of the upside profits.
Right.
So, it's just.
Meanwhile, the founders of Moderna are now among the richest people in America.
It's just
and we couldn't even get it passed that the government could negotiate. Can you believe this, everybody? Your government actually surrendered to the pharmaceutical companies the right to negotiate drug prices. And it's worth mentioning, 1 out of 4 Americans cannot afford the prescriptions that the doctors prescribe to them. 1 out of 4 Americans. And the price of insulin is obscene. Stephen, I think a lot of people don't realize one of the most powerful pre-existing conditions for COVID is diabetes. And one of the reasons we have such a high rate of diabetes in this country is because of the high price of insulin. And, we have so many more chronic diseases than in other countries because same issue, like you were talking about, the food companies, big agriculture companies, chemical companies that just are not regulated because there's been this orgy of deregulation ever since Reagan.
I'll say this, the one thing, having spent 45 days in prison, one thing the prison industry and the healthcare industry have in common is the prison industry wouldn't know what to do without crime, and the healthcare industry wouldn't know what to do without sickness. And they need it. And that's why we have, I think the healthcare system we do. We don't have a national health plan because if we had
too many healthy people, we get too many healthy people.
People would be healthy, too healthy to make too much, all these profits from. And, we have these serious contradictions in our society that only a really competent, strong government really could deal with, because all of us as individuals don't have the power. Our collective power needs to be manifest and expressed through our government. And that's how it used to be, by the way, in this country.
Yeah.
During some years, how do we get the EPA?
That was a Republican president. Richard Nixon was a Republican president. Exactly. Everybody, if you haven't seen my interview with Nancy McLean, you can see that on YouTube, or you can see it on my Substack page. She wrote a wonderful book called Democracy in Chains, talking about how all this happened, how this planning began with the Koch brothers back in the 1970s. And the expression they used was that the absolutism of property rights. That's what they stood for, the absolutism of property rights. And in their minds, in order for the absolutism of property rights to prevail, democracy must be kept in chains. That's what they've done. That's what they're doing. Don't let them do it. We have to stand up now, and we will. We have a history of that in the United States, whether it was the abolitionists or the women's suffragettes or the civil rights movement. Let's just not be the first generation to wimp out on doing what it takes to push back against these corporate forces that have been with us from the beginning.
And kids, get your heads out of your phone and start looking around and seeing what's really happening.
Yeah.
Too much democracy can be terrifying to the elites.
Oh yeah, they just can't stand it. Don't get mad.
Yeah.
Don't get
Yeah.
mad, get busy. We have midterms in November. Please don't buy into this anti-electoralism nonsense. The forces that we're talking about here tonight love the fact that you think voting doesn't matter.
Oh, yeah.
They would love that. Please, we just have to keep going, keep going. If you look at seizethehouse.com, you will see some really great non-corporate backed candidates. There are many non-corporate backed candidates around the country. When Stephen was talking before about looking up who had gotten donations from the oil companies, had gotten donations from military industrial defense contractors, who had gotten donations from whatever the big business interests are, big oil, et cetera, what this is doing to our country. We need non-corporate backed candidates. We need candidates on every level of government who are not taking donations from these forces. And we need all of us to be at work on the local level, as well as on the state level, as well as on the federal level.
You got it.
We got it. So Stephen and I agree. We assume if you're still listening to us that you agree too. So we all agree in consciousness we're going to get this done.
We love talking to each other.
I love you, Stephen. I love you. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. God bless all those people in Ukraine. God bless all those people in Russia who are so bravely protesting this. And may spirit come upon Vladimir Putin and make him sane.